A while ago on this channel I reviewed a Samsung camcorder from 2009 that Samsung marketed as a so-called HD-like camcorder because it recorded in standard definition and had upscaling to 1080p via an HDMI output. Well, it turns out Samsung was not the only one to do that. This is a JVC model from 2009. It's the GZ-MG670. It's an 80 gig hard drive camcorder. As you can see, it says HDD right there, and that alone was enough to fool some people into thinking that it was an HD camcorder. Whenever they saw HDD, they didn't know the difference between that and just HD. So some people assumed any hard drive camcorder was high definition. But you can see another sticker here, 1920 by 1080p upconvert via HDMI. So just like that Samsung, this records standard definition and then upscales it to 1080p at 60 frames per second progressive via an HDMI output. You can see the HDMI output right there. I was actually shopping for a camcorder back in 2009, and I knew this model existed, but I didn't know it had that feature because I thought it was just the same thing as their flash memory camcorders except with an 80 gig hard drive. But the flash memory models don't have the HDMI output. And there's another unique feature this model has. You can see a setting here, analog I/O. You can actually set it to have an AV input instead of just an AV output. It's the regular jack here like most camcorders have for one of these cables with the 4 conductors on it for the video and 2 audio channels and ground. On this one it can serve as a video input. You just have to be careful to find a cable with a rather narrow plug on it because it's kind of recessed into this little corner here, so some cables won't actually fit into that jack. So I plugged in my cable here. It's showing a blank screen, and I have it plugged into my old Hi8 Handycam here. So if I turn that on, it's in 16:9 mode, and you can see the image from the Handycam on the JVC, and it even recognizes it as a widescreen video signal. So if I switch the Handycam to 4:3 mode, you can see this switched over to 4:3 as well, so it actually recognizes the aspect ratio. And if I hit record, now it's capturing video from the Handycam or whatever other video source you connect it to via the composite video and stereo audio. So that's a very nice feature to have. And it records the captured video as MOD files, which are a variant of MPEG-2. There's a program called SD copy which converts those into regular MPEG-2 without re-encoding. But modern versions of Windows Movie Maker and Apple's iMovie will work with the MOD files without any conversion necessary. But aside from the HDMI output and the AV input, this is pretty much the same thing as any other standard definition JVC camcorder. In fact, I'm using one right now to record this. I'm using my GZ-MS230, which is a 2010 model, so it's 1 year newer than this. But it actually has a couple less features. For example, this one has an automatic lens cover, while on this one it's manual. You can see I can actually close it while I'm recording. And you can see the little bump on this side where the hard drive is. It's a 1.8 inch hard drive. And here's one flimsy thing about these JVCs. This is this really thin hand strap, which is really uncomfortable to use. Although they do give you a lanyard strap part of it, which you'll probably want to use more often anyway. And on the bottom it has a micro SD card slot in case you don't want to record onto the hard drive. You see it in there. On the front you can see the stereo microphone and the LED light and the lens, which has a lens thread on it, but it's not a standard size. It's 30.5 millimeters, which means it's just a little bit too big to fit any standard 30 millimeter lens attachment. So that's really stupid. Pretty much forces you to use JVC's own accessories. On the back you have the battery, a DC input for charging. There's the AV input output, which I discussed, and here's the USB towards the front. On top is your zoom lever and your snapshot button. This can take still photos, but they're not very good quality. The maximum resolution for stills on this is 832 by 624. I got this camcorder on eBay, and the one strange thing it does is every time I turn it on, it asks me to set the time and date. Even if I set it, the next time I turn it off and turn it back on again, it forgets it. It doesn't forget any of the other settings. All the other settings stick, but for some reason it loses the time and date every time I turn it off, so I don't even bother setting it. And you can see some buttons here for going between still photo and camcorder mode, and you can switch between playback and recording mode, and the button to see how much hard drive space and battery life you have left. And you can turn off the on-screen displays, or at least some of them. And then on the LCD panel you get these so-called laser touch controls, which was really just a gimmick. You can see the ones on the bottom function as hotkeys to do various different functions, and on the side here you can scroll up and down and you get these fancy blue LEDs, but it's really imprecise. It's very difficult to just go one step. You really have to be careful, so it's actually pretty annoying to use. I highly prefer a little joystick like Canon and Panasonic used. It's also annoying that you have to go through the menu here to turn on the LED light. There's no dedicated button for it. Well, there's the built-in LED light. This says 35 times optical zoom, 40 times dynamic zoom, which uses more of the image sensor area, which means you get a wider field of view and more zoom, but I believe the image stabilization is not as good as in regular optical mode. And then of course you get various amounts of digital zoom, and it only has digital image stabilization, it's not optical. And you can select either 16:9 or 4:3 aspect ratio for the videos you record. It has a wind cut option, but on these JVC camcorders all it does is cut out all the bass, so it sounds very tinny. And you can see various options for the HDMI output. You get 3 different resolutions you can choose. Auto 1 is 1080p, as it says right there. Auto 2 is 1080i, as it'll say right there. And you also get 480p. And I believe if you connect this to a 720p television, it will use 720p. So the auto settings just indicate the maximum resolution. And it has an option for HDMI control, which I believe turns on the TV if you turn on the camcorder and plug in the cable. And one nice thing is that when you're recording video, you can take a snapshot. As you can see there, it says photo, so it just takes a frame grab from the video. So now if I go into playback mode and switch it to still photo mode, we should see our 2 snapshots there, which is going to be pretty low quality, but if you're recording a video and you want to get a photo of something, it's very convenient to have that feature. So that's pretty much it for the features and controls of the JVC GZ-MG670 camcorder. I don't have an HDMI capture card, so I'm not going to be able to get any direct footage from the HDMI output, but I will upscale this video to 1080p in video editing so you can see what it would look like if you were using the HDMI output. And based on my experience with these JVC camcorders, I think it'll be a lot more passable than that Samsung camcorder that did HD upscaling, because this uses a better lens and a better image sensor than the Samsung camcorder did. I forgot to mention that one other feature this camcorder has that the flash memory version doesn't is support for remote control, although I didn't get it with remote control, and it's not compatible with my Sony camcorder remotes. I'm now recording of the GZ-MG670, so the quality should actually be almost the same as this other JVC I was just using. This is my GZ-MS230 from 2010, so it's 1 year newer. But otherwise it's mostly the same thing. I got this camcorder on eBay and it came with one of these really cheap aftermarket power supplies, and it even says Victor Company of Japan, so it's a fake JVC power supply, and it's like nothing but air in there. I would not trust it at all. The original AC adapter would look something like this. This is actually the one from my Japanese market Victor camcorder, but the JVC ones look the same. And even though it's smaller, this is actually heavier than this one. I just remembered that my Victor camcorder came with a remote control And it does work with this camcorder, although all the controls are in Japanese, but I can start and stop recording. I can zoom in. There it goes. I can zoom out. Here's a quick audio test of the JVC.
It's not easy to be me. I wish that I could cry, fall upon my knees.
There are many sounds in your day-to-day life. There are sounds that wake you up. Sounds that make you smile. Sounds that energize you. And sounds that help you relax.
Here's a low light test using a JVC GZ-MG670. These JVC camcorders do pretty well in low light, although they do exhibit some of the ghosting and trailing effect that the Canon FS200 has, although not nearly as bad. The LED light doesn't have a very broad range, but it certainly helps in low light. So I'll turn it off again. Here's an audio test. Now I'm going to do a quick test of the AV input using the video output of my Apple IIgs. And I guess this GZ-MG670 will be replacing this GZ-MS230 that I was using to record the first part of this review. Because you can see when I open the LCD to turn it on, it powers on, but the display remains blank. It can still record. It's recording right now, but you can't see anything unless I flip this thing around. You still don't see anything until I close it back up against the camcorder, and then it starts working. So obviously the flex cable that connects the LCD to the camcorder is cracked and it only makes contact in a certain position. Same thing that happened to Centex Video and Shango 066 with their JVC camcorders. So I don't know if it's going to happen eventually to the one I'm using right now, but it seems to be a common problem with JVCs. It's fixable. You can replace the LCD and the cable, but it's just a lot of work because these are very tiny camcorders, so a lot of tiny screws and things to take apart to get to it. I like the one I'm using now better anyway because it has an automatic lens cover, while this one is manual. And people are worried that these things will break, but in my experience I have this Canon FS200 which I bought new in October 2009, and I've been using it heavily ever since, and its automatic lens cover works perfectly fine. Absolutely no problems with that. In fact, no problems at all with this camcorder. It still works just as it did when it was brand new.